brainstorm.
Today's episode is brought to you by the self-help book everyone's talking about. Today is Now by Dr. Samuel Benjamin of the Institute for Eclectic Modality Therapy in New York. Dr. Benjamin is a recognized pioneer in alternative short-duration therapy with long-lasting benefits. It's available on hardcover, paperback, and Kindle on Amazon. So stop waiting for tomorrow, won't you? Today is Now.
Wow. We're back, and it's episode 7.
Yeah, we took a little break.
Hiatus? Not long enough for a hiatus, more of a break.
Does that count? Yeah, I don't know what the demarcation between hiatus and break is. It was getting close to a hiatus.
It felt like it, but it's great to be back, and it's exciting that it's episode 7. We're past the halfway mark of this season.
Yeah.
And factoids, number 7?
I have none because I realized that you really, you were kind of exhaustive in the first season. You really laid it all out. There are a couple bits of housekeeping. We got some really good feedback from corporate on our prior episode. You told us about Margaret Rudkin, the founder of Pepperidge Farm. Yeah. Yes. I don't know if you did this on purpose, but that seems to have really pleased corporate and staved off for now any talk of us having to go do some mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training.
That's great to hear. I for a second, I thought you were going to say we caused a spike in sales, which would be exciting. It would mean that our audience bought an inordinate amount of Pepperidge Farm products, considering we don't have, a listener base large enough to make an impact on the stock price.
Well, it's getting bigger. I mean, the number of listeners is getting bigger. In fact, we got an email from a listener who did not sign his name, but from the email address, he's John W. 4207. He wanted to let me know. I guess he listened to some prior episode where I mentioned being vegan, and he said that the Pepperidge Farm puff pastry dough sheets.
Yes.
He said those are vegan.
No way.
Yeah, so that's just an extra little bit of it.
You have a pastry shell with no butter?
Well, that's up to the user, to the operator afterwards. If you want to slather on some butter, I'm not going to come over there and be the vegan police.
Well, I meant as an ingredient. I would think that in the frozen.
Apparently not. Okay. I mean, I didn't double check. According to John W. 4207, I can be safe in using that Pepperidge Farm product. So thank you to John W. 4207.
7. Interesting. His email address ends with a 7, and this is the 7th episode.
Perfect. Yeah, it's starting to feel like it's all meant to happen.
Yeah.
Wanted to compliment corporate also. That's a new sponsor. Regular listeners of the show will say, well, where did that come from? No idea. Got to ask Lizzie.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to her.
That too is a good tie-in to the show because from what I read of that book, I did not get through the whole book yet, but I did get pretty deep in it. And it's a heavy self-help type vibe. So that connects to the man I'm going to tell you about today.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah, Lizzie did forward a copy, and I've also started that book. Obviously this guy's known for working quickly, and so you don't have to, have therapy for the rest of your life. He fixes you pretty quick is what I understand.
Yeah, some of the ideas are kind of out there. I had this feeling like, I bet he does fix some people really quick, but also other people, I wonder if they even stick around for the second or third session. Like it's an aggressive therapy.
Yeah, I wonder if he considers people who don't come back as cured automatically. You know what I mean? That would skew the result.
Maybe as long as they pay their bill, that's considered successful therapy.
But I find like at least in the first few chapters, again, not through the entire book, but he mentions or someone had mentioned the saying, if the shoe fits, wear it. And Dr. Benjamin said, well, consider that and then go barefoot. And I found that to be both inspiring and puzzling. So I'm curious to read the rest of the book.
That actually would be a good tag for that book. I mean, as long as we're getting into it, inspiring and puzzling. It is a
Yes.
little puzzling. I'm a big fan of the barefoot walking.
Yes.
Uh,
Abibe Bikile, the African Olympic champion. He ran the Olympic marathon
well,
barefoot.
what about the girl from South Africa?
That's right. The one that tripped up Mary Decker.
Yeah, Zola
Zola
Budd.
Budd. Yeah.
That's pretty hardcore.
While we're mentioning South Africa,
Mhm.
I want to at least give a quick hello to some of our listeners. As we've mentioned, we now recognize some of the listeners where we have at least two listeners. We'll mention where they're listening from.
Great.
You recall that?
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have one in or two in South Africa?
South Africa did not make the list this week, primarily
Oh.
because honestly, we do have one listener there. But you remember the rule is we have to have at least two before I mention where they are.
If Zola Budd has her Google alerts set, maybe we'll have two as of next week.
Cross our fingers. So today, let's say hello to our listeners in San Antonio, Texas.
The Lone Star State. Fantastic.
Let's say hello to our listeners in Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's in Canada.
It is.
So
It is. That's way up there.
Winnipeg.
I have some friends where they hail from Portage. I think Portage is near there. Great folks up in Winnipeg, and they finally got their hockey team back. So congratulations on that.
Awesome. And then finally, let's say hello to listeners in Matsuyama.
No way. Really?
In Japan. Matsuyama is about 400 miles from Tokyo. And at least two listeners from Matsuyama, Japan. So that's exciting.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm excited about
that. As usual, especially with some of those exotic locations, those listeners, feel free to send us an email at killershipwrecks@gmail.com. That's killershipwrecks@gmail.com. Tell us how you stumbled onto us. I still want to hear from the folks in Peachtree Corners, Georgia.
Yeah.
Well, when we go on tour, maybe we'll do one of our live shows in Peachtree Corners.
I'm looking forward to it. So now, episode 7, you mentioned before I cut you off that the biography that you'll be presenting today in some way relates to the fact that we do have a new sponsor who's sort of rooted in self-help and therapy. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. Excellent listening and comprehension. It seems like you're really dialed in today.
I'm back from a break.
And also, the barefoot thing is also going to connect with this guy.
Interesting.
One of my favorite time periods, and this goes back to Killer Shipwrecks, is ancient times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you can go back to all sorts of civilizations. You could go back to Mesopotamia, Sumeria. Wow. You could go back to ancient Rome. Today we're going to go back to ancient Greece. I mean, my top favorite is ancient Rome, but today we're going to go back to ancient Greece.
Didn't you present a shipwreck? Was it Crete or where were you?
Very good. In fact, if you remember that was near
where
Cyprus.
Your mother-in-law went to boarding school.
Exactly. That was near Cyprus. That was the Kyrenia is the name of that ship.
Love that. That was great.
But that too is a good tie-in because it's the same time period. We're talking roughly, we're like in the 300s BC.
Wow.
Yeah. Is it Alexander the Great?
Yes.
Yeah, it's back in his time. Our hero is a man named Diogenes. Diogenes, you don't get so many people. Real person.
Nice.
You don't get so many Diogenes babies nowadays, but back in the day, that was a very common name.
Really?
There was all kinds of Diogenes running around, and this one. So I say that for disambiguation purposes. Mm-hmm. This one is sometimes referred to as Diogenes of Sinope.
Okay.
Sinope is where he's from originally. It is a little town on the northern coast of what today is Turkey. Okay. In fact, I think it's the northernmost point in modern day Turkey. This is around 400. He's born in either like 412 BC or 400 BC. They're not sure exactly. The records are incomplete from...
Plus, with all those Diogenes, it's probably hard to discern which Diogenes you actually know about.
I mean, you can't throw a rock without hitting a Diogenes back then. He is not... He's from I don't know if it's a powerful family, but it's well off enough. His dad is a mint master. He mints coins for the ruling powers. It's cool for a while, and he's got a good gig going, but then both his dad and Diogenes get in trouble and get run out of town for a controversy having to do with the debasement of
What the
currency.
heck? Oh, uh-oh.
And it's unclear exactly what was going on, whether the motive was financial, commercial, or that part of the world. There was a little battle between, are we going to be ruled by Persia or by the Greek Empire? And so the ruining of a bunch of currency may have been related to that political struggle that was going on. But young Diogenes, he's got to get out of town. He's got to leave. And another indication that he's from a well-off family. When he leaves Sinope and he's going to head for Athens, he's going to go to the big city. Mm-hmm. Part of his traveling accoutrement, he's got a slave.
Ooh.
Yeah, Manes. Or Maneus. I don't know how you say it. Manes. But this slave is no dummy, and on the trip to Athens, he escapes.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. And Diogenes, just to give you a little early flavor of his philosophy, says effectively, screw it. If Manes can live without Diogenes, Diogenes can live without Manes. So he's not going to replace the slave once he gets to Athens. He's like, I'm going solo now. I'm going to, bare bones here.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to do stuff for myself.
Okay. I like this Diogenes. He's kind of coming around.
He's coming around.
Yeah.
But the issue of slavery will come up later, but he's going to be on the other side of that equation. Yeah.
He's not like that guy that went to Brazil because he's like, all right, at least I can still have my slaves.
God, what was his name? The Confederados.
Yeah, that was Norris?
So he gets to Athens, and Diogenes is
when is he shipping off?
Young adult. Okay. Let's say 20. I mean, who knows for sure? But
needed to get out of Sinope. Yeah,
he had to get out of Sinope. He's got the law on his trail. He's looking to make a fresh start. He is well read. He's well educated. He's heard about there's all kinds of famous philosophers walking around in Athens back then. Mm-hmm. There's Socrates, Plato, those guys. But there's one that he's really interested in named Antisthenes.
Antisthenes.
And that guy is the father of a school of thought and philosophy which came to be known as Cynicism.
Oh, now I'm familiar with cynics.
Cynics today, the word has come to mean what? Like, kind of having a low estimation of your fellow human, or not. I don't know. How would you describe
someone who's a cynic?
Yeah.
Well, definitely someone who's a little bit more glass half empty.
Yeah. Back then it meant something different. I mean, back then what that school of philosophy stood for is a big emphasis on living this simple life. Not there were a lot of people in Athens who were concerned with things like wealth or reputation or rank, in the military or in the government. So the meaning of the word today has evolved, and in the way of words evolving to some extent, you're right. It's almost kind of means the opposite. But back then it was like these guys stood for we don't really believe in material possessions as the source of happiness. Yeah. We believe in actually that school of philosophy then bleeds into Stoicism. That is what it leads to. But there with the cynics back then, it was sort of like, screw what other people think. Don't worry about what other people think. Lead a good life, lead a simple life. Mm-hmm. And fun fact for you and I are both big lovers of dogs.
Yes.
The word cynic comes from the Greek word back then for dog-like.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, that's good. I like that. But interesting. So the cynicism that you're speaking of is more of, I guess, a positive-minded way of approaching the world.
Yes, it's positive. There's lots of good messages. They're on to that idea that the Stoics develop more, which is kind of, nowadays we call it like the serenity prayer. It has to do with figure out what you can control and what you can't, and just let go of all the crap that you can't control. The cynics were on to that.
But that time period because that's right around Buddhism, right? Like that's a similar type of philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in India and places like that, it was even, going
Yeah,
back even further. They were looking into these ideas, especially the
right,
ones around asceticism, not, living a life of sort of voluntary poverty.
right. But if it's involuntary, like if you're living a life of poverty, but you don't intend to live a life of, can you then
I don't
claim
know if you get
cynicism?
credit for that. I don't know if you get like
You
a
definitely
cynic.
become a cynic. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I don't know if they give you a gold star for that because it's
not
like
enough. Yeah,
you didn't choose.
right.
I like the fact that the word comes from. There's varying explanations of why that school of philosophy is associated with dogs, which
Mhm.
it
That's
very much
fascinating. Yeah.
is. It's associated with dogs. One is that dogs live in the moment
Hmm.
and they know how to be happy wherever they are.
Right.
They don't need a lot of like trappings or a lot of, there's a place in the shade on a hot day, they're happy. Another theory is that this guy Antisthenes would give his lectures at a place like a they call it a gymnasium, but it's like a
I thought you were going to
gathering
say a dog
place.
park. Yeah.
Dog park.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the place was known as the place of the white dog.
Oh,
So it may just be that he gave his lectures at a place that was associated with that was named for a dog.
interesting. I thought gymnasium, the word gymnasium means technically exercise naked. That's what I was told back in elementary school.
Definitely back then.
Yeah.
I just imagine all these guys. It's just different cuts of
Clothing optional.
white
Yeah.
sheets. Yeah.
Right.
Now for our guy, so our guy Diogenes shows up in town, and he has heard about Antisthenes,
Hmm.
and he is all over him like a cheap suit.
Wow.
He's like, I'm gonna learn everything that this guy has to offer, and he's just fairly early on. Antisthenes is like, dude, back up a little bit, or I'm gonna smack you over the head with my walking stick. Like,
Right.
enough. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like I wake up and you're there. You
Right.
know.
It's like the origin of brown nosing. Like, guys, come on. Keep the
Diogenes
blood.
says, "Well, you can break your stick over my head, but you're going to have to keep buying sticks because as long as you have an idea or a concept which I think is useful or interesting, you're not going to be able to get any separation from me."
Wow. Very
Yeah,
committed.
kind
Yeah.
of like a stalker. I think today we would call that a stalker.
Restraining order. Yeah. Like you'd have to deal with someone like this.
Yeah, today it would be like a restraining order. Then I guess it was just like a walking staff that you would
Right.
use to protect yourself from a stalker.
We've evolved.
There is a component of cynicism, and this may be why it starts to fade out, and the Stoics kind of become the replacement ideology. There's a thing that they've got kind of a brash, shameless thing. They kind of like make a point of flouting convention, like, so for instance, one of the things back then is like, okay, you can go into the marketplace and you can buy your food, you can get your olives or whatever you're
Right.
going to get. But, we're civilized people. You don't sit here in the marketplace and eat the food here.
Oh,
That was
where
like
do you
a
have to
thing.
go? Okay.
You go back to your wherever, your hut,
Right.
your house,
Okay.
and or maybe there's designated places for eating, but one of them is not the marketplace. Now the cynics are like, yeah, we eat wherever we want,
Right.
like we're dogs, we eat wherever we want. And in fact, Diogenes, in the way that like the star pupil sort of does, is particularly hardcore, and he's not a huge fan of Plato,
Oh, interesting.
and
You're
he
not talking
will
about the toy. You're talking about the actual man.
no, yeah, Plato
Yeah.
with a T. Although I
Yeah.
did
Wow.
love Plato.
Plato was great. I really liked the accoutrements, the things that you could turn and create those snakes and do interesting things with the Play-Doh.
Yeah, or the cookie cutters.
Cookie cutters were that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if Play-Doh is still a thing. It feels like something in hindsight that was like maybe carcinogenic or something.
Yeah, probably not healthy, and people did tend to taste it. But let me ask you this: this Diogenes,
How are you going to keep kids from eating that? I mean, it
you
just
can't. It's colorful and delicious. It's got great texture. But now let me ask you this:
yes.
Diogenes, I'm guessing he was going to go ahead and have those olives right there in the marketplace. So he's on
Yeah,
that
he
side of the cynics, like I'm hungry, I'm eating. Yeah.
not just at the marketplace. He'll show up like at Plato's lectures, and
Oh, right. He didn't like that guy.
his critique of Plato is that it's like way too abstract and kind of highfalutin. And he is known to kind of show up and heckle Plato and just sort of like, yeah, blah, 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 with the cave, with
Right.
the Platonic ideal, yada, yada. Or he will also show up with just a huge plate of food and like loudly eat during
Right.
Plato's talks.
So he thought Plato was too high-minded.
Yeah, he just thought it was too abstract. He was like,
Right.
"Look, dude, we're just a human being. We're just an animal. Honestly, we're just like dogs. Like, what's with all the all these theories?"
He would have liked later on, if he had the opportunity to meet Descartes, right? Because I think, therefore I am. That's pretty simple, not too high-minded, and there we go.
Yeah, and you can say, well, I'm sure Plato is like, who the hell is this guy? But actually, Plato came to know Diogenes and said he's incredibly smart, but he's also insane. He described him as Socrates gone mad. That was his
Wow.
line on Diogenes.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're still in the same company, technically, as Socrates, which puts you on a pretty high pedestal.
Yeah, like if you were doing the blurb on the back of the book, you would just say has been compared to Socrates, and you would just like leave out the insanity. one one of the ways that he stuck out.
He's mixing with some highbrow people. Like he definitely must have had a reputation because he's hanging out with like all of these, very famous, iconic philosophers.
Yeah, I don't know what the population of Athens was back then. Maybe it's just like
26 people. Half of them are philosophers.
25 other guys. Yeah, and exactly half of them are philosophers. So maybe it was a lower bar
Right.
back then, but no, he was considered very smart, and he had the passion of his beliefs. He also had a kind of like inclination for the prank or the stunt, not the prank, sort of the stunt, the
Kind of the Johnny Knoxville of his time.
public display of like, oh, what cynicism mean. Like one thing is he was known for he'd walk around all around Athens like holding a lantern in front of him even during the day, and people would be like, dude, what gives? And he would say he would either, it's unclear how it was phrased, it was either I'm looking for a man and I can't find one anywhere, or I'm looking for an honest man and I can't find. His point was, there's a lot of scoundrels and fools here. I haven't found like a real man here yet, and so I'm always on the lookout.
With the lanterns, like Dr. Benjamin might say, that's attention-seeking behavior. Right?
Yeah.
Walking around in the middle of the day with a lantern. Like, oh, come on, you're calling attention to yourself.
Yeah.
The other one thing to eat the olives in the marketplace. Okay, fine, you're hungry, you're not going to go home. But what's with the flashlight in the middle of the day, dude?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're just getting started for middle of the day. He large portion of his time in Athens, I think you would describe as today we would call it homeless or unhoused. He was known to sleep in this massive overturned, like it turned on its side, like ceramic jar. He would sleep in there at night with a blanket as a pillow.
Oh, so maybe he wasn't walking around with the lantern with all that nonsense, but really just carrying all of his belongings because he had nowhere else to go.
Part of his point is like, what do you need with all your stuff back at your house? What do you need with your house? You really don't need much. He was trying to. Right. It's this theory that what true wealth is not needing anything. So the less that you can learn to live with, in a sense, the wealthier you are. So
it's like Steve Martin in The Jerk. Like, all I need is this remote control, and that's all I need. And he walks out. He kept picking things up.
Such a good movie. I mean, yeah. So this guy, and this is yet another explanation for how cynics came to be associated with dogs. It was just that Diogenes himself was pretty unkempt, and that people said he looked like a mangy dog, and he just slept out on the street. And so that's.
But he's really living what he's preaching, right? So
Absolutely.
I mean, in a certain way, you have to respect the fact that he's not like going home to a palace like the megachurch preacher or something. Like he's actually living it.
Totally. Another example of this is supposedly one day he, again, out in the marketplace, sees a little boy like cup his hands together under like a spigot or something and drink some water. And Diogenes makes a big show of taking one of his very few possessions, which is like this wooden cup, and smashing it to pieces on the ground and saying basically, here I've been a fool this whole time. Even that child needs less than I do. I can just use my hands to drink water.
Wow, very competitive.
Yeah. Yeah. So attention seeking and competitive.
Yeah, and let's go back to that mad part, because his behavior is starting to validate the Socrates gone mad moniker.
Yeah. Well,
And I'm not so sure about the Socrates part.
and the gone mad part, more evidence for that is that his thing is there's no shame in being an animal. We are animals. Humans are animals, just a different species. So he also would make a point of, I know that this is a family podcast, but urinating, passing gas, and even gratifying himself in a sexual way publicly. That was Diogenes.
Oh, so there was more going on in the marketplace than eating.
So you can say he's a piece of work, but he's also
It's like Ted Kaczynski.
famous.
Like, he might be smart, but the guy's nuts. Like, what's going on with this guy?
He might be famous, but I mean, he might be nuts, but he is also considered brilliant. He has supposedly has 2 or 3 run-ins with Alexander the Great, and this
How is this guy getting around? It sounds like he's completely mad, and he's a spectacle unto himself, and yet he's meeting with Socrates and Plato.
Alexander the Great and his troops one time are, in some proximity, and he hears that the quote unquote famous philosopher Diogenes is near, and he says, "Oh, I want to meet him. I want to go talk to him." He comes over. Diogenes is just lazing in the sun like a dog, and Alexander the Great says, "The great Diogenes, can I give you anything? Can I do anything for you?" And Diogenes says, "Yeah, you can. Can you move over to your left? You're blocking the sun." And the troops kind of laugh nervously, like, God, this guy has no respect for anyone.
Right. He's about to be beheaded. Yeah.
But Alexander the Great kind of laughs it off. And as he's walking away, he says, "No, if I could not be Alexander the Great, I would wish to be Diogenes."
What?
And then somebody meaning like, he's living his ideals. His life is perfectly consistent with what he believes. Now, one of the troops runs back and says, "Hey, Diogenes, Alexander the Great just said if he couldn't be him, he would want to be you." And Diogenes says, "That's interesting. If I couldn't be Diogenes, I'd still want to be Diogenes."
Like, this guy's like the king of the one-liners.
Yeah,
like,
very good with the one-liner.
He's been like waiting for Alexander to finally show up in the marketplace, and it's always sunny. There's no shade anyway. So you knew he was going to bust out that line. Unbelievable, this guy.
Well, he is quite bright.
But did he have writings? Like, how did people...
Very witty. Unclear if he has writings. I mean, a lot of those guys who were running around at that time, what we know of them is from later writings by other people. There was a guy also named Diogenes, but this is Diogenes Laertius, who later writes a book called The Eminent Philosophers of Ancient Greece or something like that. Wow. And so a lot of what we know about Diogenes of Sinope comes from this other Diogenes writing a couple hundred years later. And the other, I don't know if this actually happened, the other comment is that one time Alexander the Great, again, comes over, "Diogenes, what are you doing?" He's like scraping around in a like trash heap or something. And he says, "I'm looking through these bones to find the bones of your father, but I find I cannot distinguish them from those of a slave."
He's an agitator, right? He's
an
trying to stir up
agitator.
trouble.
And again, the people are like, "Jesus Christ, he just said, what is he even saying? That Alexander the Great's dad was a slave? Like, what?"
Right.
And I think it's Alexander the Great who explains, no, his point is you can think you're like hot stuff in this life. What does it matter? Like, we all die. We're all just bones eventually anyway. Like, get over yourself. So,
well, so Alexander's pretty good at interpreting this Diogenes guy.
Yeah, but then he did have his head cut off then, but still it was
Hold on, is that true?
No.
Okay.
No.
So before you do tell us what Alexander the Great ultimately may or may not have done to Diogenes, or even speculating on what he should have done, and we could have that debate, because that's insulting. Let's hear from our new sponsor and then find out more about Diogenes of Sinope, not some other Diogenes, on the other side.
Okay, let's do it. Have you spent years in therapy with only modest results? We have the book for you. Today is Now by Dr. Samuel Benjamin. Available in all formats on Amazon, the book gives you a roadmap to a happier, more confident you. So why wait for tomorrow? Today is now.
But now I understand how you mentioned our new sponsor seems to have a tie-in a sense to the biography, because some people say that Dr. Benjamin has some unorthodox ideas, or that he's outside of the norm, and this Diogenes guy, I mean, obviously way more extreme, but people seem to still respect him.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And also the barefoot thing. I mean, didn't you say Dr. Benjamin says something about, go barefoot? I mean, Diogenes was doing it back in the day.
Yeah, but doing it to the face of Alexander the Great. So go on. You joke that he became enraged and beheaded Diogenes, but
no, in fact, he explained through his surroundings. He said, no, this is his point. His point is, you over there, you've got this rank. You over there, you've got, this many houses, like big deal. Like we all wind up over there in the heap of bones. So get over yourself.
Right. I prefer that earlier sentiment around him living what he really believes. And so my point is, well, I really believe in luxury and in comfort. And so I'm willing to dedicate my life to
comfortable pair of shoes.
Yeah, I'm less on the barefoot, more on the shoe fits.
Maybe some
fantastic.
orthotics.
I'll take this pair.
Do you guys sell orthotics?
Definitely inserts. Yeah, at this age, my back, because I do. Yeah. All right, so no, but go on. So Alexander the Great, it's fascinating that this guy's living on the street and talking to Alexander the Great.
Living on the street, talking to Alexander the Great. Now, around the middle of that century, around 350, Diogenes goes on a boat trip. He's headed to Aegina, I think is the part of Greece he's headed to. Unfortunately, his...
Shipwreck?
Not a shipwreck, but pirates.
Oh, shoot. That would have been a great...
pirates.
Geez, really?
Intercept the boat, capture some of the people on the boat, sell them into slavery, and unfortunately, our hero is one of the people sold into slavery.
You gotta be kidding me.
Not kidding you.
Diogenes becomes a slave?
Becomes a slave. Started out his life owning a slave, and then at roughly the age of 50, becomes a slave.
And ironic, as he had just mentioned to Alexander the Great, you can't tell the difference in the bones, and now he's a slave.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that is really an element of life back then, is slavery, and just
slaves everywhere. The Colosseum, it's because they just took all the slaves from, Jerusalem or wherever, and they made the slaves build the Colosseum in Rome.
So
slaves are doing everything, all the work.
Yeah. So wherever the pirates offload these slaves and sell them off, there's some sort of public place, and Diogenes.
One think he would command a high price, right? Like the guy doesn't look necessarily like a strong figure.
Well, I think he is somewhat physically strong from living outdoors. Like he's somewhat physically imposing, and he definitely
how much for the guy with the funny quips? Let's go.
He's very confident and assertive. So when they ask him at the occasion of his sale, they're saying, well, what are you good at? Basically, when they're trying to see who wants to buy this slave. And he said, I'm good at ruling over other men.
Channeling his inner Alexander the Great.
Yeah. So he says, somebody should buy me who needs to be ruled over. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy named Xeniades from Corinth who basically likes the spirit. He says, I kind of, the mangy guy, he goes, screw it. He goes I'll take that one. I'll take Diogenes of Sinope. And so they go back to Corinth, and, they have time to talk on the boat ride there. And he starts to figure out who this guy really is. And he says, oh, this guy's actually brilliant. This is a very formidable person. So already by the time he gets back, Xeniades comes into his home, and he walks in with Diogenes, and he says, this is my family. These are, my two young sons. And that is going to be the job for Diogenes. He's going to be the tutor then for those two sons.
Great use of that particular slave. You know what I mean? Like in terms of if you're going to get the most out of whoever you paid for, having him teach this brilliant guy.
And there, either he's getting slack in his commitment to his own ideals, or he gets sweet talked by Xeniades. But Xeniades is like, no more living on the street. You're very valuable to me. You're very valuable to my family. You live in our home. and you eat the
Wow.
best of our food. And later, separately to his family, supposedly Xeniades says, I have the feeling that a very good spirit entered our house today
Wow.
in this man. And he effectively becomes, so it's like a lot of times you hear this. I mean, sure, the ones you mentioned that are building the Colosseum, those are the guys being worked to death. But occasionally you hear about a slave where it's like, okay, it doesn't sound like what we would think of as a slave
Right.
nowadays. Like he's sitting there with them at the dinner table and eating the best cuts of meat along with them. And,
No longer living those ideals where I want to be on the street and in the market eating olives and
yeah,
making
and
people
probably I'm assuming Xeniades is like you got to cool it with the thing with the masturbating it like that. I do draw the
right.
line there. Like that's something that's got to be in a
There are house rules. There aren't a lot of
private
them.
place.
There are
Yeah.
not a lot of them, but that one, that we're going to stick to that rule.
That's a good rule. I don't know where if it runs afoul of cynic beliefs, but yeah, we are going to insist on that one and lived a long time with them, and eventually, I think Xeniades says, "Listen, you're free to go. And but he by that point, Diogenes likes Corinth. He likes living there. He lives even despite his extended periods living outdoors. He lives either to roughly 80 or 90 years old.
Wow. How long is he a slave? Like, how long is he in Corinth with his family?
He gets there at 50.
Oh,
And
wow.
then he's dead by 80 or 90. But it
Oh, but
sounds
he's
like,
spent the rest of his life there?
yeah, spends the rest of his life in Corinth.
Wow.
He likes it. I mean, look, all these places, you look at it on the map and it looks just ideal. I mean, it's just
No, but I'm
like
saying, like, if you become a slave at 50 and you're a slave for the rest of your life, I understand he's a teacher and he's getting good meat, but still, like, you're not free to go.
it's a soft assignment. I know that's what I'm saying. I think once the kids are like college age, heading off to U Athens next year.
Right. Like, Diogenes is an empty nester. Maybe time to move on.
No, well, my point is Xeniades is like, listen, you're a member of the family. You can stay here as long as you want, but your duties to me are effectively done. You know what I mean? You
Got
can
it.
do what you
Okay,
want
right.
now.
Still be a freeloader. You don't have to go back on the street.
Exactly.
And tell me some more of those funny stories about Plato. I can never get enough of that. Like, you really didn't like that guy, did you, guys?
You did not
Right.
think a lot of Plato. It must kill you that he's getting the big name around here.
But let me ask you this: so how did you even hear of I've never heard of Diogenes. How did this name cross your mind?
I love the Stoic philosophers, the
Okay.
people like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. But I think actually, really, I just saw a painting. There's a famous painting of him in the marketplace in his like huge overturned ceramic jar that he lives in.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I'll
so I
check
saw the
that out.
painting. I was like, what's with this guy? And so that's how I got onto him. Now, there are conflicting accounts of how he eventually finally died.
In
He lived a
Corinth.
very long in Corinth. There are three possible explanations given. One
Oh,
was simply that he ate some raw octopus that had gone bad
interesting.
and died of an illness from that. Another one, and you hear this, it sounds like something that didn't actually happen, but people were constantly giving it as a cause of death when they were trying to talk about a great man. They were like, and when he got to the end of his life and he realized he was all done here, he held his breath until he died.
What?
I don't even know if that's possible. I meant to Google that to see if you can even do
I
that.
remember when my kids used to, I'm holding my breath and say, yeah, good luck. Like, you're going to eventually. Yeah.
It feels like no matter what your mastery of your own mind is, it just feels like there would be an involuntary like reflex to breathe.
Dude, how many times have you had the hiccups? And it's like, okay, I would have killed myself by now. Like, I can't hold my breath anymore.
How do you get rid of hiccups, by the
I
way?
can't. I've never figured it out.
Okay, can I tell you how? My friend Billy Bishop, that I grew up with back in Chevy Chase, Maryland, taught me this trick as a 6-year-old or 8-year-old or whatever it is. You take a glass of water
Mhm.
and you lean over it and you drink from the other side. So as he described it back then, drink a glass of water backwards, but you lean over and
Right.
you're sipping from the other side. There's something, it's very awkward. And while you're doing it, you're like, I'm not doing this right. But I've had 100% success. I've
Really?
never, yeah,
How do
you
you
just
actually
lean
drink that?
over
Because wouldn't the water be spilling out in front of you?
a tiny bit. You just do it very gently, very carefully. You're barely tipping that glass and
Can you use a
you're
straw?
leaning over. No straw, not allowed to
Yeah.
use the straw.
Okay.
And hiccups all gone.
Oh, can't wait to
Try
try.
it.
Yeah,
Try
I
it.
will.
Yeah. Shout out to Billy Bishop.
BB, we love you. Now, the second cause
Held
of
his
death
breath.
was
Yeah.
I'm not buying that one, so I'm still going with the first one so far. What's the third?
Okay, third one is that there was an infected bite from a dog, and this is yet another theory about why it is that dogs are associated with the cynic. So, for instance, when he finally does die, word gets out. He's considered a great man. So a monument is put up both in Athens, in Corinth, and then back in Sinope, and they generally do have either like a sculpture of him or a bust of his face, and then also a little dog next, like a sculpture of a dog as well.
No, did he have a dog when he was in that marketplace under the half barrel or whatever?
They don't get into whether it feels like his philosophy would have been, we don't own, that's a separate, like that animal.
Well, I'm not saying he filled out paperwork. I'm saying like a homeless guy on the street sometimes has a little dog with him.
Yeah. It makes you even more, it makes you even more inclined to give to the person when they got they got their collie with them or their little, you got to figure he was a friend to the dogs. I mean, he did. And then people at a certain point said, well, why are you guys called the cynics? And then he had yet another reason for how they got that name, which was, we defend our beliefs and our convictions with the ferocity of a dog protecting its master.
And was there a big like funeral, a big like sort of like parade?
I don't know the answer
is he buried
to that.
Somewhere with like, can you go see Diogenes' tomb or something?
You can go see any of these three monuments I mentioned. You can go either to Athens or Corinth, which all three of these places seem really cool. Corinth and
I'd love to go.
Sinope, like right on the coast. I mean, it just seems lovely.
There must be leather there too, right? Corinthian leather, isn't that a thing?
Yeah, who was that guy?
It was Ricardo Montalban when he did the car commercial. Is this real Corinthian leather? I think there's my knowledge of Corinth.
The Chevy Volare.
Was that really the car?
I think so. It was so exotic when he would say that.
Yeah.
Real Corinthian
leather.
Yeah. He was amazing.
Real Corinthian leather.
He was wasn't he the Fantasy Island guy?
Yeah, of course. That's what was so crazy. It was like his Fantasy Island guy.
Yeah.
The plane. The interesting. So there are monuments. There are no writings. So it's more of people have talked about Diogenes, and he continues to be this force based on the cynicism and all of that.
Yeah. And what I take from it is I try to remind myself, what are the things you can control? What are the things you can't control? And also, I do like that concept of the less you need, the wealthier you are.
Yeah, that's a great sentiment. Obviously, with him, he took it a bit far and slipped into that category of like, you're a crazy person. You're living under, a barrel. But still.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned, I wouldn't use the problematic term crazy person, but I'm glad you mentioned people with mental health challenges, because there is a psychological, Lizzie, edit that out. There is a psychological disorder now called Diogenes syndrome, and the two of the main symptoms are one, just total disregard for hygiene, just self-neglect, total self-neglect, just looking, I think, in internet slang, he was a messy bitch.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Can see your interest in that, or at least in your slight.
So I'm drawn to that. That he was a slob. But the other aspect of the psychological disorder is ironic, because it is the exact opposite of who he was. But the other people now who are diagnosed with Diogenes syndrome, the other thing they have is hoarding.
That makes no sense.
Total misnomer.
He's the opposite of a hoarder.
Yeah, well, it's like you pointed out with the evolution of the term cynic. It's come to mean something different from what the original cynic philosophers espoused.
Got it.
But so I would say I have kind of like half of Diogenes syndrome. I don't have the hoarding, but I do have the poor hygiene.
I'm not going to go there, but
I do have a dog. And I do believe that in many respects, dogs are superior to humans. So I feel like I would have gotten along with the guy.
Well, as a vegan, you wouldn't have been eating any raw octopus.
True. The other thing, I don't know if you could afford to be a vegan back then.
Yeah,
I mean, it feels like it was catch as catch can. You'd have to sort, especially if you're living on the street back
Yeah,
then.
yeah. You're
It's like
lucky to have the olives. Of course, you're eating in the
yeah.
marketplace. You don't have time.
In fact, when somebody's annoyed at him, they're like, "Oh my God," with the like whacking off in public. And he said, "Yes, but if only I could get rid of my hunger by rubbing my belly. That's what it would be really great."
Interesting. This guy's got, again, a lot. Like, I feel like
He's always got to come back. If they had like open mic night, he would have killed.
like you could not get. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this guy's holding his own with Alexander the Great.
Yeah. And I will say he navigated with some grace the transition from slave owner to non-slave related to just slave himself. Like he kind of managed the changing circumstances of his life pretty well.
Yeah, that's, I mean, again, fascinating because it seems like he really did live by what he believed and said, which you have to give him credit for.
There's some rap lyric, we look at us now. Basically, we started on the bottom. Now we're here. Yeah, exactly. He's the opposite. He sort of started at the top.
Right.
He had slaves, and his dad was the mint master.
Yeah.
And then kind of, traveled downward toward homeless and enslaved.
Right.
But the spirit was still strong. And you got to salute him in that moment of being auctioned off, saying that his skill is ruling over other men.
I mean, he's that, as I said, you got to respect the guy. He's got some great sayings.
He's got some chutzpah.
But it's weird that, again, when you consider the famous sort of Western philosophers, like I've never heard of Diogenes when, in fact, as you said, like all kidding aside, he's got some great thoughts.
Yeah. And basically what happens then is the people are they're like, yeah, there's some good ideas here in cynicism, but the whole thing with the shamelessness and the, making a public display, heckling Plato or eating food really loud like that. And so with Stoicism, you see a move away from that where it's like, okay, how can I be like a gentleman, but also still have these theories about the important thing is being true to your own values. And it's not important how much money you have or what rank in the army it is. So Stoicism to me is like the next is leveling up. It's like cynicism, but like made a little more palatable, like less of a kind of homeless madman vibe.
Right. Cynicism light. It's more palatable for sort of respectable people because no one's going to just.
And it's better in a crowded place. I mean, it's like one thing if you're not going to wash and you're just out in the desert and you're a hermit, but like Athens, I assume it gets hot in the summer. It's like if you have a lot of cynics together, like in a bathhouse or something, it's not going to smell good.
Again, and the lewd behavior, you hear of these things on like a subway in New York, for example, someone exposed. Imagine Diogenes, like this guy, he'd be in the holding tank his whole life.
That's a step too far. You wonder if that guy, his teacher Antisthenes was like, oh man, you've lost the plot. Like enough with the, out in public with that. Some of this stuff like that's.
Well, and the guy that bought him, at the auction gets him home and is like, look, Diogenes, anything you want, it's all good. Just be yourself. Whoa, Diogenes. There are some rules. Kids, can you go in the other room for a minute? I just got to talk to
Diogenes. And again, with the two sons, I mean, they probably were of the age where he could explain the facts of life to them.
Oh, let's look at that fresco together, boys. That's not where we want to go.
Yeah, I would like to have sort of Alexander the Great level interactions with him, like maybe bump into him 2 or 3 times. We have some repartee. There's an exchange of ideas, some mutual respect, but like not being at close quarters with him, like while he's eating or whatever else.
Yeah, having an exchange, a little more than an arm's length with a couple of guards nearby. Always great to talk to Diogenes. We're gonna definitely have a few one-liners to relate to the kids at home. Okay, you'll never guess what Diogenes said today.
Oh God, listen to what Diogenes said.
I do think it's fantastic because again, I am not an expert in ancient Greek philosophy, nor am I an expert.
Now you are.
Now
you are.
No, but
I
now
can give you
I feel like I've learned so much, which is fantastic beyond just Diogenes, but this whole sort of cynicism and how it then became. It's good stuff.
Yeah, and he was a dog lover, and we love dog lovers. Now, listen, thank you for. But it's funny because after your last presentation on Margaret Rudkin, who was such an impressive woman and so socially minded and so like trying to empower the people around her, and you were like, "Oh, who's your person?" I was thinking like, "Oh God, this guy's kind of an antisocial." compared to like, lovely Margaret Rudkin.
Right.
This guy's a hot mess.
Yeah.
But you know what? He
But
stood for his
interesting.
beliefs. Now, are you going to tease episode 8, or
I'm
are you
tempted
still
to. Yeah, I'm going to
just a
give you guys
little
a little
something?
something. So it's going to be slightly unorthodox. So it's not going to adhere to the strict rules of the killer biography sort of framework.
I like when you go outside the rules of the framework, by the way, because I
Yeah.
felt like with Confederados you did a little
Yes.
bit as well.
Yeah. I
Where
mean, it was rooted in that guy, but yeah, it was a movement. It was.
I can't wait. I think those are the best episodes when we go outside the rules a little bit. So
Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. It's going to be slightly outside the bounds of how we've structured our episodes, but not entirely. And I think it's a pretty great story. So I'm excited to.
it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to match Margaret Rudkin, but
Oh, Margaret.
that might go down as the best one this season. But we'll see.
There's still a long way to go. Well, Doctor, fantastic episode, Diogenes. I also always appreciate a one word biography. Diogenes. It's kind of nice.
Yeah,
And so that's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. It's like Madonna. It's
like
just he's
Madonna.
Diogenes.
Okay, let's play our outro music as we always do at the end of the episode, and we will have another killer biography next week.
Can't wait.